So what is the kind of opportunity that you have now, okay, and which you can take up, okay? As we just mentioned, how can you actually get and how can you actually work across different countries across the globe, this role. So how will you start? Like, you can think, as Kenneth said, कि UAE hai. So UAE pe, like, we'll focus, we'll learn everything, we'll get a client, and then that client moves to another country. Then you, like, how would you work with that? You need to, because there are entities now or startups now that you have, they get funded so crazily. They get so crazy, so much of crazy funding that all of a sudden they will be like wanting to expand to a lot of different jurisdictions across the world, right? Like we had news of this startup that's called Fresh to Home, and they got some funding from UAE, and now they are talking that we want to expand to over 50 countries across the world. So that's the kind of crazy thing that, like, an expansion that will happen immediately when you are in that sort of a business. And you can have a product like that, okay, that product is something which clicks and it hits across the globe, then that will be, it will be an expansion like that, right? So, and this is what we think, that we need really good CV, for working
Yeah.
with this kind of MNCs. We have to have
Yeah.
really great experience, big names, law firm names, okay, and we put a whole list of internships and works and everything that we have done for that. So how do you start, or how do you start moving towards your goal if you want to work with multinationals in that? So these are the five things that you will actually need to be there. What's the number one? The number one is, of course, you have to have a working knowledge of lots of the aspects of commercial law. Drafting and reviewing contracts, we said, but in this case you will have a lot of different questions that are arising from the contracts, because these are going to be cross border contracts, okay? So you have to understand how implications of cross border contracts work. Like in the MNC that I had, you could, you had uniform contracts that would come, which were like kind of agreed. It was basically swap dealing, kind of agreements, but this will be where they were buying from the developing countries and they were selling it to the developed nations. So it will be completely cross border contracts, okay? So you have to understand that. And now, how do disputes in these contracts work? So you have to understand that if if we reach in a position where there are disputes in these kinds of contracts, then how do we resolve those kinds of disputes? And also investments, and I have mentioned this, like, even in a prior webinar, that you will kind of be acting as a person who is centered between investors, okay, and you will be handling or working that those agreements or those contracts or those documents through with the external consultant. So one side there are investors expectations on how things work with the business, and you have to get that objective achieved in terms of having that specific law applicable and yet delivered, okay? So you have to be careful on that. You will be somewhere in between in that situation. Let's move to next. You need to know this, as I said, across jurisdictions, and to be looked in as an employee in whom the company can invest. So I shared my experience like this, that I had an interview with an MNC, and kind of after some ice breaking and everything, the guy, he was Chinese, he was a GC and he was Chinese, and he asked me this question, that how do preference shares work in India and how are they redeemed? Do you know how that happens in UK, and do you know how that happens in Ireland, or what are the kind of parallel provisions? And then since then, both of the jurisdictions, Ireland and UK, had a completely new Companies Act that came into place after while I was there working with them. So these kind of situations can happen. So are you able to deal with this? And if they come to know that you have dug deep, you have found out where the company is present, and you have taken interest, and you have found how the things work for that specific company over those different countries where it is present, then you will be considered to be someone in whom the company can invest, right? And you don't need to, it's not just the law, but you have to know how it gets executed. Okay, so your knowledge of IP and contracts can become useless if you don't know how that gets applied and enforced across the jurisdictions. You have no clue of the legal systems of that country where the cross border contract is being is required to be enforced. Then how are you going to go about getting that things done? So enforcement, you have to be aware of how that works. You should have the soft skills ability to communicate clearly and effectively. You should be able to write very well and communicate in a way that you can be trusted. Okay, to work with really experienced people. And I, again, this is one situation that I actually came across. I was working with someone who I gave an interview with a company secretary. Okay, who was of with a working with a multinational. Okay, that was the first stage before I progressed to the general counsel level. And then I worked with her. I was communicating with her on how things work. And then after that interview happened, I actually sent her a real courtesy note of a thank you, and I shared with her something that was from my jurisdiction, and I kind of compared it a bit with what was in place with Ireland, and I sent that to her. And then I realized that that was something that she really, really valued. Okay, she thought that in other circumstances someone would be kind of chilling because they have done given the interview and now they are only waiting for it. But then I took the extra trouble to deliver that, and she really appreciated that. You need to have experience in cross jurisdictional work. Without this, it's going to be very difficult. If you do not have any clue of how this works and you are not up for learning this is going to be very, very, very difficult. Okay, but if you have this, you have already. And to be fair, I've seen in many MNCs, people will depute people from other jurisdictions and bring there, and they place a premium that if they have worked in other jurisdiction and they are now coming into work with the legal department or with the other departments, whatever it is with us, it's like a premium because you have been there and you have seen the work of the legal systems there. So they'll hire someone and they'll move people between different jurisdictions. My company, which was based in Ireland and Oxford, had a Malaysian counsel for a while because that is the region where people were looking to source a lot of stuff from. So the legal counsel was from Malaysia. For quite a while, you had that kind of a person, but they brought her in from there because they believed that it's just added to their experience.